The Irish Constitution of 1937 recognises the family as the fundamental unit group of society with rights and duties antecedent and superior to all positive law. It's a magnificent expression, which later, less enlightened Irishmen have gnashed their teeth at, unfortunately. This is a wonderful summary of the Church's teaching concerning the nature of the family. The family is one of the three necessary societies in which man lives: the family, the state, and the church. The family has to pre-exist man, because without the congress of man and woman, man wouldn't exist. And without the support to woman of the surrounding society, first of all, the person who impregnated her, but also others, obviously, it would not be possible for her to preserve her child in existence, as pregnancy and childbirth are debilitating, and the raising of children is a exhausting and demanding job. Therefore, a woman needs assistance in being able to do it, and the person who is most obliged to do and provide that assistance is the person who put her in the family way in the first place. Therefore, natural reason, nature itself creates the family, and it creates the family prior to the appearance of the individual. This means that the family is more fundamental in some ways than the state. The state, however, along with the church, is what we call a perfect society. That is, it contains within itself all the necessary means for the attainment of its end. So the family is not sufficient as a society for man on his own, even if man had not been elevated to an end beyond himself and therefore had not required the church distinctly from the state. The family would still not have been sufficient for all of man's needs, because man himself is impelled to create new societies, to beget further children, to marry. It is not good for man to be alone, as the good book says. And therefore, he needs to marry someone else, and he can't marry his own relatives. Therefore, he has to form a new family, a new society, in the context of a society larger than the family to which he belongs. So for that reason, mysteriously, marriage, the covenant by which the family is established, the covenant between one man and one woman for a society of the whole of life, ordered towards procreation, that covenant not only generates the family, but also generates the state. Because in order that marriages occur, there has to be a society greater than the family in which new families are generated. This means, of course, that all other things being equal, the functions of civil society, of the state, will be quite small and residual, because they are whatever is left over that the family cannot do for itself. Now, of course, as societies become larger and more technologically sophisticated, those things which the family cannot accomplish by itself will multiply. In a society of subsistence farmers, they will be relatively small. In a highly technologically sophisticated society of many millions of people, they will be much more plentiful, and therefore the activities of the state will be greater. But the state in our fallen world, because like every other fallen entity, it hungers for an infinite good and lacks of itself the means to attain to that good, the state will tend to try and grasp at more than is its right. This grasping is the original sin of Adam and Eve, who grasped for the forbidden fruit, of the evil one who grasped at equality with God. And the proper mentality of the Christian is the mind that is in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself and assumed the form of a slave. So this graspingness of fallen man infects all forms of society, and the more august society, the more dangerously infected it is with this graspingness, and therefore the state will tend to appropriate to itself more powers than it really possesses. And one of the most unfortunate examples of this, particularly in modern times, is the false claim of the state to be able to govern and even dissolve marriage, which it cannot do because marriage is antecedent and superior to all positive law because it is directly instituted by God through human nature. Therefore, even in regard to the natural order, Leo XIII teaches, it is possible for us to perceive that marriage is a sacrament, that it is a sacred thing, that it is a covenant which is more than a human artifact and which is older than any state. And therefore, it cannot be defined and limited by the state, and it cannot be dissolved by the state. In fact, marriage is intrinsically indissoluble. Only the Holy See, only the Pope, because his authority instituted by God himself, has the power to dissolve a marriage, and he can only do that with a non-sacramental marriage of non-Christians or with an unconsummated sacramental Christian marriage. Once a Christian marriage is consummated, no power on earth, even that of the Church herself, most augustly the Holy See, even that power does not have the ability to dissolve a marriage. So sacred is the matrimonial covenant. That also means that any state which attempts to say that certain groups of people, ethnicities or nationalities or whatever, cannot marry each other, they have no authority to do that. If they say that marriages can occur on Tuesdays, they have no authority to do that. If they, as we've already mentioned, say that they have the power to dissolve marriage, they cannot do that. The state, of course, has very serious obligations to the family and to married persons, and it is in the vital interest of the state to ensure that those who raise the next generation are married, because the natural law requires that they be married. Therefore, the state has the right to insist that persons who are contracting marriage register the fact that they are doing so with the state. That is a legitimate activity on the part of the state. It doesn't give the state the power to bring the marriage about, but it gives the state the power to keep track of the existence of a marriage. The state can also say that 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, whatever, are unable to contract marriage because obviously one can know by natural reason that such persons lack the necessary maturity to enter into a free exchange of consent. And therefore, the state is not exercising any jurisdiction over marriage by simply saying we don't recognise marriages below a certain age because we have no way of ascertaining and we're morally certain that the parties are not able to freely contract marriage. But if the state were, for example, to say that no one can marry till the age of 25 or the age of 21 even, then it's clear that it's exceeding its authority, because someone can certainly attain to the age of majority, to full adulthood and autonomy prior to the age of 21, and therefore restrictions so late in life are certainly beyond the state's power. In fact, any restrictions of that nature are beyond the state's power. The state is simply recognising that a 12-year-old is unable to contract marriage. It's not bringing it about that a 12-year-old is unable to contract marriage. The Church, however, as God's representative on earth through divine revelation, does have jurisdiction over marriage. So the Church can make the age at which marriage can be contracted later than that which is established by reason and nature alone. The Church can restrict the circle of those one can marry more widely than nature alone constricts it. The Church can say it has to be your fourth cousin or your fifth cousin before you're able to get married. The Church can say that you can't get married during Lent, or you can't get married on a Friday if the Church wants to, because the Church has authority to do this directly instituted through divine revelation. Whereas the state, whose power comes from reason alone, does not have the power to do this, both because it isn't determined by divine revelation and because the matrimonial covenant is prior to the existence of the state. Obviously, because that covenant exists for the sake of procreation, that covenant can only exist between one man and one woman. This is not something which was discussed by Leo XIII, as he had not yet considered the horrific possibilities of modernity to their full extent, although he had some idea. In fact, hostility to marriage and the family is baked into the societies which have grown out of the era of nominalism. This was observed by the first minister of Elizabeth I, the persecuting Protestant Queen of England, in the 17th century, in the reign of her successor, when he was addressing Parliament and musing on the reason-bending authority which Parliament had taken to itself by claiming to make the king the head of the church. He said, "I know not what Parliament might not do. It might even make a man to be a woman." Prophetic words indeed. And he was seeing that by claiming to be able to make 2 + 2 = 5, to make 8 sacraments or only 2 sacraments, basically to be able to change divine revelation and natural reason at its own discretion, Parliament was assuming to itself a kind of divinity, an idolatrous claim about the authority of the state. And this kind of idolatrous claim for the state renders the family its enemy, because it involves a claim to be able to penetrate into and rearrange even divinely instituted societies such as the family itself. This is why the last great conflict in the history of the world, John Paul II tells us, will be between the church and the anti-church, Christ and the antichrist, over marriage and the family, because it's the final frontier, the final barrier between man and the power that would seek to dominate him, the grasping state which desires to be worshipped. This is described very beautifully in paragraph 2244 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, in which it explains that all societies are animated and directed by a vision of man and his destiny, from which they take their line of conduct and their objectives, and that those societies which fail to recognize the divinely revealed religion will necessarily ultimately come to worship themselves and impose upon man a totalitarian power, as history shows. So, what is the true account of the origin of civil authority? What is the true nature and limitation and proper function of the state? This is a question which Leo XIII discusses in the encyclical De Eternum, which we will turn to next.